The average professional athlete in the four major sports makes more than $4 million per year. Yet more than 70% of athletes are in financial trouble within 3 years of retirement. You might ask yourself how this is possible, but the reality is there's a multitude of things that come into play. Today, I'm going to talk about 5 of those. Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Turner, former Major League Baseball player and current co-founder of Moment Private Wealth. In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 pitfalls that athletes run into that put them in that situation of earning millions of dollars and then facing potential financial hardship just a few years after being done. The first one is pretty simple. It's trusting the wrong people or just frankly not hiring the right people. The way I like to think about it is as an athlete, you want to make sure that you have your personal board of advisors. This is your entire financial team, making sure that they're talking and communicating with each other. The reality is those people work for you. So you need to make sure that when you're hiring those people, you're asking them the hard questions. I did a video that talks about 10 questions you should ask for any financial advisor you're thinking about hiring. That's step 1. Step 2 is making sure that you have the right people on the right seats at the right time. Oftentimes what I see for professional athletes is this. Maybe they get drafted and they don't sign for a ton of money up front. And maybe they hire a family friend or somebody that they know. And that might be okay at the beginning, but then when they sign the big deal, when there's a lot on the line, when there's tax planning and cash flow to look at, risk management and investment decisions, they don't reassess their financial team. They stay with the same people. And oftentimes this can cause issues in the future because the reality is you need to make sure that you have specialists for you and your situation for where you're at and where you're looking to go. At Moment Private Wealth, our average client is north of $5 million, which means that the typical clients, the typical athletes that we're working with are either high net worth or ultra high net worth. That means that the strategies, the solutions, the things that we're thinking about on a daily basis revolve around folks that are looking for those sorts of solutions. For athletes, oftentimes it's finding the right people for the right seats at the right time. The second money mistake that I see far too often is a lifestyle that is unsustainable. Let me explain what I mean. Picture this. You either are a professional athlete, or I just want you to envision this in your mind. All of a sudden you go from making no money or just enough money to maybe afford Chipotle, not double chicken or guac, just basic Chipotle, to having millions of dollars overnight. It's this weird feeling, okay? And the reality is a lot of athletes out there can buy almost anything. You get a big paycheck, you want to go buy a new car? Great. You want to go buy a new watch? Great. You want to put a down payment on a house? Great. But is it really great? Because just because you can buy something does not mean that you can afford it. I talk about this time and time again. Athletes need to make sure that they distinguish between one-time purchases, or what I like to call reward purchases, and lifestyle decisions. A lifestyle decision is something that you can continue to buy over and over and over and over again. A reward purchase is something that you do one time. What I see far too often is athletes build out an unsustainable lifestyle. You get a check for $1 million, you go out, you buy the big house, you buy the fancy car, and you don't realize the ongoing costs that come with that. Before you know it, the checks stop, and you got to support and you got to maintain this lifestyle that's gotten so big over time. And ultimately what happens is this. You get done playing and a little bit of ego is still involved. You don't want to downsize your house. You don't want to tell the people around you that, hey, we can't go out to dinner and I'm not going to pay for it anymore. You don't want to downgrade your car. You don't want to not go on the vacation you've been going on for years. You want to keep buying the same clothes. All these things lead to this. An athlete gets done playing and they would almost rather it burn to the ground than them make those huge lifestyle adjustments that they need to. So if you're an athlete out there, I can't recommend this enough. You need to build a sustainable lifestyle from the start. The goal for an athlete is when they get done playing, they can keep living the exact same lifestyle that they were living while they were playing. Now look, there's a million ways to invest, but I think you can just group them into 2 buckets. Bucket 1, things that work. Bucket 2, things that don't work. Oftentimes what I see is a huge money mistake for athletes is they get drawn to the shiny object investment. And look, I almost went down this path a few times myself. You are a target for things like this because you have the money, and if somebody has access to you, oftentimes they've pitched this thing to millions of people before, and you're an easy target for them to pitch it to next. So what I tell every athlete is make sure that the investments that you have are in the bucket of things that work. They're not in the shiny object bucket of things that may or may not work in the future. The money that you're earning on the field is really hard to earn. You want to make sure that it's there for you in the future. Need I not remind you, 70% or more of athletes run into financial hardship within 3 years of retirement. This isn't because they didn't make enough money, but oftentimes it's because they made really big investment decisions that really weren't investments at all. They were speculation. There was speculation that they could go from 0 to 100. What I will tell you is this. The key to investing as an athlete is very simple. It's staying in the game. So how can you invest your money that you can stay in the game longer than everybody else? I talk about this a lot, but the biggest superpower you have as an athlete with investing is time. You have time on your side. So what I mean by that is we want to make sure that any investment we make allows us to stay in the game long enough to let compounding take effect. So remember this analogy. You want to make sure that your campfire stories are left to things that you're doing on the field, and that your investment stories are so boring that you don't even want to talk about them. Because the reality is this: the best investments I've ever made are kind of like watching paint dry. Say it with me. Everybody can Google your name. That makes you a target, okay? The fourth big money mistake I see athletes make is they think all about the upside and they never think about the downside. And when I think about downside, the word that comes to mind, the solution that comes to mind for me is insurance. There's all different forms of insurance that are out there, from property and casualty, things like your home, your auto, your umbrella. There's liability coverage, there's life insurance, there's all these different forms of insurance out there. What I just want to tell you is that you need to make sure that you're covering your downside as an athlete. It is so important to make sure that as you continue to build your net worth, that you don't just think about the upside, but you also think about the downside. Time and time again, we've seen athletes run into a situation where their life changes overnight. Something happens, they put themselves in a situation that they regret, but the reality is because they have a ton of money riding on it, they can be sued for that, it can be taken away from them, they don't have things that are in place to protect them. So I'm telling you this, if you are an athlete and you are earning significant money out there, make sure you're also not just thinking about the upside, but you're also thinking about the downside. And you're thinking about the ways that you can potentially protect yourself. The fifth money mistake that I see is that athletes underestimate how much money they need to have saved to keep living their same lifestyle. So now we've already talked a little bit about sustainable lifestyles, but let's talk about how much money you need to save in order to support certain types of living expenses. If we look at the data going back about 100 years, the S&P 500 has returned roughly 10%. Now the S&P 500 is a good measure of the US stock market. That does not mean you're going to return 10% in your investment portfolio, because that would mean that all your money is positioned towards equities or your growth bucket. And the reason why I say this is pretty simple. The typical basic math that we look at for an athlete, if you were to retire today and you were to say, Jacob, how much money can I spend off the portfolio that I've saved? Our baseline starting point is usually around 3%. So I'm going to give you some easy math here. If you have $1 million saved, that means you can roughly pull about $30,000 off the portfolio each and every year without dipping into the initial principal, your initial snowball of $1 million. Now, $30,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money if you had $1 million there. And that is the biggest mistake I see athletes make, is they underestimate how much money they actually need to have saved. So if you had roughly $30,000 as your starting point for each million that you had saved, that means you might need $10 million saved to spend $300,000 in a given year, year over year after year, without depleting the snowball. Now, look, there's a lot more calculations that go into that. There's a lot more nuance that goes into those decisions. But I think it's really important for athletes to understand that you need to have more money saved in your nest egg than you probably think you do. And that's one of the biggest money mistakes that I see athletes make. My goal with all this, guys, is to be as educational as I possibly can. It's all the things that I wish I knew when I signed for millions of dollars as an 18-year-old kid. It's what I wanted along the way. It's the education that I was searching for that I had to go find on my own. I'm trying to give it to you all in one place. If you're a professional athlete out there, rewatch this video. The reality is, if you can avoid these 5 simple mistakes, you can avoid the 4 out of 10 outcome. You can avoid being part of that statistic I talked about, that more than 70% of guys within a few years are in financial trouble. You have an incredible opportunity, not just for you, but for your family and for future generations. If you can do this right on the upfront, you have time on your side. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you like and subscribe for future videos. Connect with me at the different places that I post content. There's all different types of educational content that I put out there. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, here on YouTube, on my newsletter. The links to all that will be in my bio below.